What if the worst moments of your life, the ones that left you broken and afraid, held the key to a transformation you never imagined? What if, in the deepest darkness, you were not alone? What if there was a power beyond comprehension waiting to pull you from the abyss? Today I'm going to share a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about pain, forgiveness, and the power of divine love. Edith's life was a constant battle for survival, trapped in fear and abuse at the hands of the very person who should have protected her. But something extraordinary happened, something that defies the boundaries of human understanding. In her darkest hour, she experienced something that changed her forever. Not once, but 3 times, she was brought to the edge of death and beyond. And each time, she was transformed in ways she could never have imagined. But this isn't just about Edith's story, it's about you. Because just like Edith, we all face moments where life feels unbearable. We all question whether there's a purpose to our suffering, whether God sees us, hears us, or even loves us. And today, I'm going to show you that the answers are far more powerful than you could ever have believed. Before we dive deeper into this life-changing journey, take a second to subscribe to the Blessed Horizons channel. You don't want to miss the upcoming videos that will guide you to a deeper understanding of faith, love, and purpose. Now, let's explore this story and find out how Edith's incredible journey from fear to faith could transform your own life. Imagine a childhood where fear isn't just a feeling. It's the air you breathe, the ground you walk on, the very foundation of your existence. For Edith, fear was her constant companion, a shadow that never left her side. Every corner of her home, every moment of her day, was tainted by the storm that raged within her father. His anger wasn't just something that erupted in violent bursts. It was a dark cloud that loomed over their lives, unpredictable and suffocating. Edith lived in a world where safety was an illusion, where the simple act of existing could trigger an outburst. Her father's anger wasn't merely a physical assault, it was a psychological trap. His fists weren't just weapons of destruction, they were verdicts, the final word on who she was, small, powerless, and utterly at his mercy. There were nights when the house would tremble with the violence of his rage, and all Edith and her sister could do was brace themselves. But sometimes, the fear didn't even come from the blows themselves. It was the silence in between, the moments when they didn't know if they were safe or if the next strike would break them for good. In these moments, Edith found herself caught in a web of hopelessness. Her mother, a figure who should have offered comfort, was a mere ghost. She was there physically, but emotionally and spiritually, she was absent, staring into a world that Edith couldn't access. When Edith sought help, when she bled, when her ribs ached, her mother's response was silence, a fleeting touch on her cheek, but no words, no answers, no protection. It was in these moments of helplessness that Edith began to look for something beyond her immediate reality. She turned to books, to words that promised a different world, one where she could escape the horrors of her home. And she found solace in church, a place that spoke of love and kindness. Yet, even there, the question lingered. In her heart, why didn't God intervene? If he saw everything, why didn't he stop her father's cruelty? Edith's first encounter with death wasn't marked by the traditional signs of passing. It wasn't the end of a life, but the shedding of her earthly chains. At only 9 years old, Edith's body was a fragile vessel that had already endured so much. But in that moment, when death came to claim her, it wasn't a cold, sterile experience. It was something extraordinary. 1 minute, she was consumed by the pain of a broken world. The next, she was weightless, floating above her own suffering. No longer bound by the physical limitations of her body, Edith was free from the heaviness of fear, from the constant ache of her heart. The ground below her, the backyard that had seen so much pain, was now a distant memory. The air was still, the grass swayed without wind, and for the first time in her life, Edith felt peace. But this peace was not merely the absence of pain, it was the presence of something far greater, something divine. Above her, beyond the very sky itself, a bright light appeared, not the blinding, searing kind she had heard about in church, but one that filled the entire universe with softness, with love, and with purpose. She knew instantly what it was. God, not as she had been taught, but as she had always hoped for him to be. This was not a God who sat on a distant throne. This was a God who enveloped her, who loved her unconditionally, who filled her with the knowing that she had purpose, even in the darkest of moments. And then, as if speaking directly to her soul, God's voice reached her, not in words, but in a language deeper than sound. "You are here because you have something to do," he said. A wave of bliss washed over her, and she knew deep within that her suffering had not been in vain, that there was a purpose for her life, even if she couldn't yet see it. "Do you wish to continue?" he asked. Without hesitation, Edith answered, yes. She would return. She would go back to her life, no matter how broken, because she knew now that it held something greater than she had ever imagined, a purpose. And with that decision, the light began to fade, and she plummeted back into the painful reality she had momentarily escaped. Edith returned to her body with an overwhelming sense of emptiness, like someone who had tasted heaven but was now forced to swallow the bitterness of life again. The love she had felt, the divine love, the peace, was gone, and in its place was the familiar heaviness of fear. But she was not the same. Something had shifted. Deep within her, a seed had been planted, and though it seemed small, she knew it would grow in time. Her purpose was not only to survive the torment, but to break the cycle, to live with a deeper understanding of love and forgiveness. The first step in that journey came unexpectedly, in a simple request that shook her father to his core. Edith knew what she needed to do: be baptized. It wasn't just a religious rite to her, it was a declaration that she was not the same frightened girl who had been dragged across the kitchen floor. She was someone different, someone with a connection to a divine purpose, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. When she approached her father, the fear that used to grip her heart wasn't there, not in the way it had been before. She was still scared, of course. He was still her father, still the man who had terrorized her for years, but she wasn't afraid of him in the same way. There was something greater than his anger, something stronger than the fear he had instilled in her. This time, when she stood before him, it wasn't a plea for mercy or a wish to escape. It was a quiet assertion of her will, an invitation for him to see her as she truly was now, not just as his broken daughter, but as a child of God. Her father's reaction was not one of anger, but of fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of the spiritual transformation his daughter was experiencing. "Did the church tell you to do this?" he asked, his voice shaky, as though the very concept of faith had never been part of his world. Edith shook her head, a simple response, yet one that carried the weight of everything she had experienced. "No," she said, "God told me." For a moment he didn't move, and the silence that hung between them was thick with unspoken words. But then, reluctantly, he agreed to speak with the preacher, though he made one. "Think clear. Don't tell your mother. It will worry her." A week later, Edith stood in the baptismal pool at church. She was the youngest person ever to be baptized there, and as she stepped forward, the coolness of the water against her skin reminded her of how much she had endured. Her father sat in the audience, his expression unreadable. When the preacher's hand pressed against her back, it was as though the whole room faded away. All that remained was her, the water, and the sacred promise that she was making, not just to God, but to herself. As the preacher spoke the familiar words, "I baptize you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit." Edith was submerged beneath the water. For a brief moment, she felt as though she might be taken home, back to that divine light she had seen. But when she rose from the water, She was still here, still in her broken world, still in the same house with her father. The love she had felt before was distant, but now, in its absence, she had a new understanding of her purpose, to be a light in a place that had known nothing but darkness. The congregation clapped as Edith surfaced, and though her father did not move, there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something unfamiliar. Perhaps, for the first time, he saw her not just as the little girl he had hurt, but as something more. But when morning came, nothing had changed. The abuse continued. The violence persisted. Yet Edith was different. She carried with her a quiet strength, a knowing that her journey was far from over. And this, for now, was enough. It was during one of the most harrowing times in her life that Edith experienced her second near-death encounter. This time, the suffering was more physical than emotional. Her body had grown weak, ravaged by a fever that felt like it could consume her entire existence. She had no strength left, no energy to fight against the crushing weight of her illness. She spent the day lying on the couch, her body aching, her head a constant throb. The world around her felt distant, a blur she could no longer grasp. But then, the fever intensified. The air grew thick, as if the room itself was pressing in on her, and she could feel her consciousness slipping away. Everything around her seemed to blur and fade until there was nothing but the numbers. They weren't floating in the air, but they were there, moving, shifting, rearranging themselves in patterns she couldn't comprehend, yet somehow understood. With perfect clarity, complex equations, mathematical formulas that shouldn't have been accessible to her mind, filled her vision. She was seeing them, but it wasn't just her eyes. She could feel the equations, the calculations, the knowledge, like a current of electricity running through her veins. It terrified her. The knowledge was alien to her, and it felt wrong, like an intrusion into her mind. How could she know this? How could this knowledge be inside her when she had never been able to grasp it in school? Panic rose within her as she tried to push it all away, but the numbers kept coming, flooding her mind. She needed her mother. With great effort, Edith dragged her weak body off the couch and stumbled toward the kitchen, her legs trembling beneath her. When she found her mother sitting at the table, staring into nothingness as usual, Edith opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She could feel the terror rising in her chest as the numbers continued to scroll across her mind. They were too much. The knowledge was overwhelming, and then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the numbers faded. The fever still clung to her, but the alien presence, the terrifying knowledge, was gone. It left her feeling empty, as though she had been used, tested. Her mother didn't even notice her presence, too absorbed in her own world to care. What had just happened? Had it been a hallucination brought on by the fever, or was it something else? Something she didn't understand. The fear of the unknown gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the strange sense that this encounter, this knowledge, had a purpose. It wasn't random. It was a message, a warning perhaps, a sign that the universe was showing her something beyond her understanding. But what and why? Her mind spun with questions, none of which had answers. All she knew for sure was that this was the second time she had encountered something beyond her human comprehension. Her connection to the divine was no longer just about love or forgiveness. It was about something much larger, something much more cosmic. The next few days passed in a blur of fever and confusion. Edith tried to ignore the alien presence, to push it from her thoughts, but it haunted her. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was meant to understand it, meant to decipher the message it held. The equations, the knowledge, none of it made sense. But there was a part of her that knew it was important. And that part, the part that still clung to hope despite the world around her, refused to let it go. Days passed, and Edith's fever slowly began to break, but the unease lingered. The alien knowledge she had encountered during her sickness haunted her. A reminder that there were things beyond the physical world, things her mind couldn't comprehend. The fear that gripped her heart when she first experienced the equations didn't subside. If anything, it grew stronger. But it wasn't just fear. It was something else. A sense of purpose had taken root in her, a calling that demanded attention, even though she didn't know what it meant. One evening, as she lay in bed, struggling to sleep, she was gripped by an overwhelming sense of weightlessness. It wasn't the sensation of being physically lifted, but more of an inner lightness, as though her soul was floating above her body. At first, she thought it was just a side effect of the fever, but then the room around her began to change. Her senses, once clouded by the pain and confusion of illness, suddenly sharpened. The familiar shadows of her room, the walls, the furniture, the dim light of the street lamp outside, began to blur, as though they were being erased from existence. And then, everything went dark. But this wasn't the blackness of sleep or unconsciousness. It was a vast, empty darkness, like the space between stars. And in that space, something profound shifted. A presence filled the void, not in a way that could be explained by human terms, but in a way that was undeniably real. It was as if the very fabric of reality had been torn open, and she was looking into something other, something vast and eternal. In that moment, Edith realized that she was no longer bound by her body. She wasn't confined to the pain, the fear, or the broken home she had left behind. She was free, her soul unchained, drifting in a realm beyond time and space. And in this realm, she wasn't alone. She felt a presence, a being or force that wasn't of this world. It wasn't something she could see in the traditional sense, but she could feel it, like an unspoken connection between them. It was a knowing, an understanding that was deeper than language, deeper than human experience. This presence exuded peace, love, and a profound sense of purpose. Edith's heart filled with wonder as she realized that this wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. It was real, something beyond the limits of human understanding. It was as though she had been allowed to glimpse the divine realm, the place where souls rested, where time and space had no power. It was a place where there was no pain, no fear, only eternal love and peace. And then, just as quickly as it began, the presence faded. The darkness returned, and with it the weight of her body. The sense of freedom and love was replaced by the harsh reality of her sickness, her pain, and the life she had to return to. But something had changed. Something deep within her had shifted. She wasn't the same person who had entered that dark realm. The encounter had opened her eyes to the possibility of something greater, something beyond the suffering she had known her whole life. She had seen a glimpse of what could be, and it filled her with a new kind of hope. But even as she tried to understand what she had just experienced, one question lingered in her mind. Why had she been shown this? Why had she been chosen for this revelation? The answer was not clear, but Edith knew, deep within her, that it was only the beginning of a journey she could not yet comprehend. Edith didn't speak about the experience to anyone, not to her mother, not to her sister Maria, not even to her father, who remained a distant figure, consumed by his own struggles. But inside her, the encounter in the dark, otherworldly space kept echoing, like the gentle whisper of a forgotten memory that insisted on being remembered. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling her in a direction she hadn't yet fully grasped. Days turned into weeks, and as her physical health improved, the weight of the alien knowledge she had encountered lingered. The complex equations, the insights into the fabric of the universe, none of it made sense. Yet all of it felt deeply important. She tried to dismiss the experience as a fever dream, but deep down, she knew it was more than that. And then, the third near-death experience came. This time, there was no illness, no fever. It wasn't a physical ailment that triggered the event. It was something else. It was a moment of profound emotional collapse. Edith was sitting alone in her room, the house quiet, her father away for the night. She had been keeping herself busy, working on assignments for school, doing chores, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. But everything inside her felt hollow. The isolation, the years of abuse, the unrelenting silence from her mother. It all crashed down on her at once. She stood up abruptly, a wave of dizziness threatening to overwhelm her. Her vision blurred as she staggered toward the window, needing to breathe, to escape the crushing weight of her own thoughts. She threw open the window, the cool night air hitting her skin, but it did little to ease the storm inside her heart. It wasn't until she looked out at the night sky, at the distant stars twinkling above, that something strange happened. The air around her shimmered, and for the briefest moment, the world seemed to bend, as though reality itself was warping. Then there it was again, an unmistakable presence. This time, it was not a fleeting, ethereal feeling. It was something solid, something tangible. Edith's heart raced as she realized it wasn't just a feeling. It was an actual being, an entity from beyond. It stood before her in the space between the stars, an alien presence unlike anything she had ever seen or imagined. Its form was amorphous, shifting in ways that made it impossible to define. But the essence of it was clear. It was not of this world. The being exuded an energy so pure and ancient that it resonated deep within her very soul. It spoke without words, but its message was clear. She was not alone. She had never been alone. This entity had been watching over her, guiding her, even in the darkest moments of her life. And now it was calling her to something greater, to a purpose that transcended her earthly suffering. "Do not be afraid," the presence communicated, though it was not through language. It was an understanding, a knowing that cut through the fear and uncertainty. You are more than you know. You are meant for something far beyond this life. The pain you have endured is not the end of your story, but the beginning of something new. The weight of its words settled over her, and for a moment she felt a sense of peace unlike anything she had ever known. The chaos of her life, the abuse, the silence, all of it faded into the background. In the presence of this alien being, she felt a profound sense of purpose, of clarity. Edith knew in that instant that she had been chosen, not by God, not by fate, but by something far beyond her understanding. She had been prepared all her life for a journey that would lead her beyond the pain, beyond the limitations of her existence, into a realm she couldn't yet comprehend. The being before her seemed to sense her confusion and uncertainty, and it offered a final piece of guidance. Trust your path. It will lead you to the answers you seek. But remember, the journey is long and you must walk it with faith, courage, and love. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, the presence faded, leaving Edith standing alone in the quiet of the night. The stars above twinkled, as if nothing had changed. But in her heart, everything had shifted. She knew her life was no longer just about surviving. It was about becoming someone who could understand, who could transcend the pain, who could serve a greater purpose. But what that purpose was, she didn't yet know. All she had was the lingering feeling that the answers would come in time. For now, Edith had to continue. She had to keep walking, even when the road seemed uncertain, and trust that the path would reveal itself, one step at a time. The encounter with the alien presence haunted Edith for days, its meaning far beyond anything she could fully grasp. She kept the experience to herself, unsure of how to explain it, even to herself. She didn't want to risk being misunderstood, judged, or labeled as crazy. In her heart, she knew she had experienced something real, something sacred, but the world around her wouldn't be able to comprehend it. So, she kept it locked inside, only sharing pieces of the encounter through the subtle changes in her own behavior. She began noticing shifts in herself. The constant weight of fear she'd carried for as long as she could remember began to lighten. The shadows that had clung to her steps, dragging her down, seemed to dissipate. She still faced the violence and neglect at home, but her response to it had changed. The overwhelming sense of helplessness that had once paralyzed her now seemed foreign, like an old coat she no longer fit into. There were moments when she caught herself smiling for no reason at all, as if some light had seeped into her soul, filling the empty places with warmth. She found herself paying attention to the small details of the world, the sound of birds in the morning, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves of the trees outside her window, the scent of rain on the earth. Life, for the first time, felt like more than just a struggle. It felt like a gift, fragile, fleeting, but beautiful in its imperfection. But the real transformation wasn't just internal. Edith began to feel a call, a push to do something with this newfound awareness. She felt a deep need to find a way to help others, to make sense of all the suffering, not just her own, but the suffering she saw in the world around her. She wanted to offer what she had found, to show people that there was more to life than the pain and darkness they faced. But how? She didn't know the answer yet, but she knew one thing. She couldn't stay in that house any longer, the place where she had endured so much trauma, where the walls seemed to carry the weight of the past, no longer felt like home. It was suffocating, and the violence of her father was escalating again. He had become more erratic, more dangerous. Edith knew it was only a matter of time before something terrible happened, and she didn't want to be there when it did. One night, after another episode of violence, Edith made a decision. She would leave. It was the only way to protect herself, to find the space she needed to heal. She packed a small bag with clothes, a few books, and the few mementos she still held on to. A photograph of Maria, a drawing she had done as a child, a book of poetry her mother had once given her. She had no plan, no idea where she would go, but in that moment, it didn't matter. She just needed to go. The next morning, she slipped out of the house, leaving behind the home that had been a prison for so many years. She walked down the street, unsure of where she was going, but somehow knowing that this was the first step on a new journey, a journey she had been called to, a journey that would change everything. Edith's escape was not without its challenges. She had no money, no support system, and the world seemed like an overwhelming place. But she held on to the sense of purpose she had received during her near-death experiences. There was something waiting for her, something that would help her make sense of everything. After days of wandering, she ended up at a small shelter for women in need. The director, a woman named Carla, took one look at Edith and knew she had been through something unimaginable. Without asking too many questions, Carla offered her a place to stay, food to eat, and the kindness Edith so desperately needed. It was in that shelter that Edith began to rebuild. The healing process wasn't quick, and there were moments when the past threatened to pull her back into its suffocating grip. But she held on. She began to go to therapy, to talk about the pain, the abuse, the isolation. For the first time in her life, she had someone listening to her, someone who believed her. She also found herself drawn to spirituality in a way she hadn't before. While she still struggled to reconcile her experiences with her faith, she found comfort in prayer, in meditation, and in helping others who had been through similar experiences. It was clear to Edith that her journey wasn't just about her own healing. It was about helping others find their way too. Years passed, and Edith's life took on a new shape. She went to college, studied psychology, and became an advocate for women and children affected by abuse. She started speaking out, using her voice to empower others who had suffered in silence. Her message was simple but powerful. You are not your pain. You are not defined by the suffering you've endured. There is a path out of the darkness, and through it all, Edith continued to remember the lessons she had learned during those near-death experiences. She wasn't the scared little girl anymore. She was strong, resilient, and full of purpose. She had been given a second chance, and she wasn't going to waste it. One day, many years. After she had left home, Edith received a letter from Maria. Her sister had returned to visit their father after years of estrangement. The letter was short, but it contained something Edith never expected to read: an apology from their father. He had never been a man to express regret, but in the letter he wrote about the abuse, the anger, and how he had failed them. It wasn't much, but it was something. For Edith, the apology wasn't about forgiveness, it was about healing. It was a symbol of the man her father could have been had he not been trapped by his own demons. And while she could never forget what he had done, she knew that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the hurt. It was about freeing herself from the chains of bitterness and anger that had once held her captive. In that moment, Edith felt a deep sense of peace. She had found her purpose. She had found her way. And no matter what came next, she was ready. Years passed, and Edith's life evolved in ways she never imagined. Her work as an advocate for survivors of abuse grew, and she became a beacon of hope for others who felt trapped in the same darkness she had once known. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, sharing her story, and helping others understand the importance of healing, forgiveness, and self-worth. She never forgot the lessons she had learned from her near-death experiences. The overwhelming presence of divine love, the alien encounter that opened her eyes to the vastness of the universe, and the quiet, sacred moments when she felt the hand of something greater guiding her forward. These experiences shaped her into the woman she had become, a woman who knew that suffering, while inevitable, didn't define her. Edith began to explore her spirituality more deeply. The encounters she had during her near-death experiences had planted a seed in her, a longing for deeper understanding. She started studying different philosophies and spiritual traditions, trying to make sense of the mysteries she had witnessed. The more she learned, the more she realized that the truth she sought was not confined to any one path. It was universal, a thread that ran through all of humanity's spiritual endeavors. But despite her success in helping others, there was still a part of her that yearned for resolution with the one person who had caused her the most pain: her father. She had not seen him in years. After her escape, they had never truly spoken again, except for that brief and reluctant letter he had sent her. It wasn't much of an apology, but it was something. He had tried to reach out a few times, but Edith had always found a reason to avoid him. The wounds were still fresh, and the anger was still there, buried beneath the years of healing. She had forgiven him in her heart, but the act of seeing him again, confronting him in person, she wasn't sure she was ready for that. But life has a way of pushing us toward the things we avoid. One evening, Edith received a phone call. It was from Maria. "He's dying, Edith." Maria's voice cracked. "He's in the hospital. They don't think he has long." For a moment, Edith felt her world shift. The fear, the anxiety, the unresolved anger all bubbled to the surface. She hadn't spoken to him in so long, and yet the thought of him lying in a hospital bed, close to death, struck something deep inside her. She hadn't known how to feel about him for years. How could she? After everything, "I'll go," Edith said, surprising herself. When Edith arrived at the hospital, her heart pounded in her chest. She had no idea what to expect, what to say. What could she possibly say to the man who had shaped her life with his violence, his anger, his neglect? What could she say to the man who had almost broken her spirit? She walked through the sterile hallways, the sounds of hospital machines beeping in the distance. She found the room, hesitated at the door, and then, with a deep breath, stepped inside. Her father lay in the bed, frail and weak. The man who had once been larger than life, whose presence had filled every corner of her childhood home with fear, was now a shadow of himself. He barely recognized her at first, his eyes cloudy and distant, but when he saw her there was a flicker of something: remorse, shame. He tried to speak, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Edith, I'm sorry." She sat by his side, the words hanging heavy in the room. For a moment she didn't know what to say. She had spent so many years dreaming of this moment, the moment when he would apologize, when he would acknowledge the hurt he had caused. But now that it was here, she realized that it didn't change anything. It didn't take away the years of suffering, the scars that would never fade. It didn't undo the damage he had done, but it did something else. It gave her closure. "I know," she said softly, her voice steady. "I know, Dad." She reached for his hand, an act that surprised even herself. There was no anger in her touch, no bitterness. She had let go of those emotions long ago, and now, in this moment, she simply felt compassion. Compassion for the man who had never known how to love, for the man who had been trapped in his own pain, a prisoner of his own demons. "I've forgiven you," she whispered, the words coming easily. "I just wish you had found peace earlier." Her father's eyes closed, a tear slipping down his cheek as he nodded. In that moment, Edith realized that she had come full circle. She had spent years waiting for something, anything that would make sense of her suffering. She had longed for an apology, for him to see the damage he had caused. But the truth was, forgiveness was never about him. It was always about her. And now, she was free. When her father passed away a few days later, Edith didn't feel sorrow in the way she thought she would. There was no anger, no relief, just a quiet sense of peace. She had made her peace with him, and in doing so, she had made her peace with the past. Edith went on to live a life filled with purpose, love, and meaning. She never stopped helping others, never stopped sharing her story. She traveled the world, spoke to survivors, and worked to change systems that perpetuated violence and neglect. She became a voice for the voiceless, a beacon of hope for those who had lost their way. And she knew, deep in her soul, that she was living the purpose that had been laid out for her the day she had encountered the divine light, the alien presence, and the love that transcended human understanding. She had found her place in the world, and she had found peace. As I reflect on everything I've shared with you, I have one question for you. Do you believe that transformation is possible, no matter how deep the wounds? You see, my journey wasn't just about escaping the chains of fear, but about understanding that love, divine love, is far more powerful than anything the world throws at us. It's a force that can heal, restore, and guide us back to the light, no matter how far we may have fallen. If this story resonated with you in any way, I encourage you to leave a comment below and share your own experience or thoughts. Remember, you're not alone. The path to healing may be long, but it's worth it, and together we can keep moving forward. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Blessed Horizons and activate the notifications so you don't miss the next powerful story that could change your life. And as you go on with your day, I invite you to reflect. What are the walls of fear in your life, and how might they be torn down? Share with us in the comments. Until next time, may peace and love guide you.